Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing the third episode of Chronicles, The Legend of Thunder, Part 3. Also, the final Legend of Thunder part. The part begins with Vincent absolutely distraught over the fact that Marina was gone, and he comes to the conclusion that Marina must have, in fact, been taken with Raikou by Team Rocket. As for Eugene and Jimmy, they were still primarily concerned about what happened to Raikou, leading Vincent to grab Jimmy by the shoulders and yell at him for even caring about Raikou at all during a time like this, stating that his crush Marina was way more important. Jimmy was annoyed by Vincent's yelling, as he was trying to focus to come up with a plan, and Vincent was disturbing him, so he told Vincent to shut the fuck up and stop yelling, and actually be useful and help him come up with a plan. Vincent eventually obliges, although he can't stay calm for long, and begins going into another yelling outrage. Jimmy tries to ignore Vincent, but eventually Vincent's panic seeps into him as well, and his panic isn't at all lessened when Eugene warns that Team Rocket could possibly be doing something very nasty to Marina. Eugene quickly realizes that he shouldn't have said this though, as it causes Jimmy's panic to grow so immensely that he runs over to Eugene's car and tries to steal it so he can drive away in it to chase after Team Rocket's helicopter. Not wanting a stressed out Jimmy to end up crashing his nice car, Eugene blocks Jimmy from entering and reminds him that since none of them knew where Team Rocket had flew off to, it would be pointless to chase after them in the car. Jimmy didn't care though, and if Eugene wasn't going to let him use his car, then he would simply just trudge on with his feet and find Team Rocket on foot. Eugene then realized that Jimmy was initially right to get mad at Vincent for not remaining calm, as Jimmy not remaining calm was causing him to do very rash things. So Eugene advised Jimmy to stay back and think of a better plan first, reminding him that the first rule of any rescue operation was to remain calm, as you would not get anywhere if you were losing your mind. Because of Jimmy being able to calm down, thanks to Eugene's advice, he was able to use his mind to come up with an actual good plan, which was to use Vincent's Pokegear, since Jimmy realized that Vincent had Marina's Pokegear number, since they were such good friends, and therefore they could call Marina and find out where the Team Rocket helicopter was taking her. Vincent was still panicking, but he managed to give Jimmy his Pokegear so Jimmy and Vincent could make the call, and sure enough, Marina picked up. Although they were only able to say a few words to each other, being just greetings and panicking yells, as they didn't know what the fuck to say. They were just shocked to be in contact with each other, when suddenly Attila showed up, having saw Marina talking on the mech's computer monitor, so he instantly had gone to the cargo area to confront Marina, and he instantly grabbed her Pokegear and took it in his hand. Marina desperately cries out, telling Atelier to give it back, as she tries to physically wrestle it out of his arms, but this just ends up annoying Atelier. He bitch slaps her the fuck away, causing her to fall to the ground. At this point, Hun had entered the room, distracting Attila a little bit, so this allowed Marina's Misdreavus to go and attack Attila, but Attila simply grabbed it, not letting Misdreavus defend Marina in any way. And Attila begins to try and crush the Misdreavus, despite it being a ghost type, and somehow this almost works until Marina recalls Misdreavus into her Pokeball, in order to protect it. Attila was already pissed off at this, but then he got even more pissed off as he heard Jimmy and Vincent's voices through the Pokegear, with Jimmy demanding that Attila and Hun bring Marina back to them, and Jackson clarifying that even if Attila didn't bring her back, they would find them and defeat them themselves. Attila was so enraged by these taunts that he yells back, stating that he would never give Marina back, and he yells so loud that it causes Vincent to faint. And then, Attila uses his brute strength to crush the Pokegear in his hand. He then proceeds to brag about his strength to Marina, threatening that he would use his strength on her. Wow, what a fucking loser trying to hit a girl. And as for Jimmy and Eugene, they realized that the connection was obviously broken due to Marina's Pokegear being broken. And Jimmy stressed about what to do, leading Eugene to comfort him by explaining that he had an idea, as he asked to borrow Vincent's Pokegear, stating that he could access the Pokegear's communication logs to find out where Marina had called from, and therefore they could follow her to the location. Meanwhile, Attila and Hun were forced to land their helicopter as the engines were fucked, but just as they stated before, this was perfectly fine, as this now gave them the chance to activate the crystal down on the ground again and try and catch Raikou again, because they weren't giving up. Immediately upon landing, they unpack both the crystal and the computer monitors from the mech, and they also bring out Marina from the cargo room so that she can watch in horror. They do make sure to tie her up and gag her though, so that she can't make any noise or try and escape. They then placed Marina on the edge of a cliff so that she wouldn't even think of jumping off when Attila and Hun were distracted by setting up the crystal. As Attila set it in place, we then see how the purple clouds were created in the first place, as Hun uses a computer from inside the ship connected to the crystal to fire up a beam, creating the purple clouds, which terrifies Marina, as she did not expect the clouds to appear that fast. Once again, it seems as though Hun and Attila's plan to lure Raikou was working, as soon as Raikou spotted the purple clouds from a cliff, it immediately growled at them, indicating that it knew that the clouds were obviously danger, and it was going to head there. As for Eugene, Jimmy, and Vincent, who had since woken up, Eugene had in fact managed to access the Pokegear's communication logs and track them to Marina's current location. As Jimmy, Vincent, and Eugene got closer to the location, they obviously saw the clouds, causing Eugene to step on the goddamn accelerator and rush there, creating a dust trail. Assuming that Attila and Hun were using the crystal to attract other electric Pokemon because they thought that they still had Raikou. As Jimmy, Vincent, and Eugene approached in their car, Attila detected a signal on one of the ship's computers. However, the signal was different than all of the other ones so far, even Raiku's, so Attila came to the conclusion that whatever was there must not have been an electric type that was attracted by the crystal. Just then, he hears wings buzzing, and soon looks over to see that the Pokemon that the crystal had detected was a Beedrill. Beedrill immediately flew around the area, and soon flew up to Marina, and Marina instantly recognized it as Jimmy's Beedrill, since Jimmy had sent his Beedrill to scout out the area first, before they showed up. And upon Beedrill seeing Marina, it immediately flew back to inform Jimmy and Vincent and Usain that they were in fact on the right track. As Han observed the Beedrill going up to Marina and then leaving it, she remembered that Jimmy had a Beedrill and comes to the conclusion that it must have been his, and goes to warn Attila, but before she could, Usain, Jimmy, and Vincent then pulled up in Usain's car. Vincent instantly orders Usain to stop the fucking car, and Usain obliges, as Vincent then jumps out of the car and demands to know where the fuck Marina was, desperate to find her, and he then sees Marina tied up and being held by Han, which makes him go absolutely ballistic, and tries to run up and save her in desperation. But thankfully, Jimmy steps in and restrains him, reminding him of Usain's advice that you had to stay calm, otherwise you wouldn't get anywhere. And that was especially true for Vincent, as he was fucking losing his mind, and if he just charged up to Han and Attila, they would fucking murder his ass. Jimmy proceeds to demonstrate this calmness by calmly asking Han and Attila to let Marina and Raikou go. Suddenly, though, Usain cuts Jimmy off, as he states that it seemed as though Han and Attila didn't have Raikou anymore, since the crystal wasn't attracting any electric Pokemon, and they were still willingly using it, meaning that they were probably desperate to get Raikou, as that was their main goal. Han and Attila confirm the fact that they had lost Raikou, but laugh as they state that it was only a matter of time until Raikou showed up. Jimmy rebutted that Raikou was probably smart enough now to not come back, but Han and Attila stated that they thought that Raikou was now pretty fucking dumb at this point, even Han, who had initially thought that Raikou was smart, so they thought that Raikou would come running back. And sure enough, Raikou did, interrupting Han's talking as it launched a Thunderbolt directly at the crystal. Although, Raikou didn't reveal itself, as it stayed hidden, launching the Thunderbolt from afar. As everyone questions where the Thunderbolt came from, the Thunderbolt bounces off of the crystal, and as a result, the electricity goes everywhere, destroying both Team Rocket's mech and Usain's car. Seeing how strong this Thunderbolt was, Attila was the first one to come to the conclusion that Raikou must have been the reasoning for it, and tries to go around and find him, but he's stopped as another Thunderbolt hits the crystal, and it bounces onto him, although he wasn't that injured by it. Eventually, as even more powerful lightning strikes and thunderbolts began to hit the crystal and bounce off, forcing everyone to have to dodge them swiftly with movements, Usain, shortly followed by everyone else, realizes, like Attila had, that Raikou was the source of all this electricity, and Usain comes to the conclusion that Raikou must have fully regained all of its strength, being stronger than ever, allowing it to strike the crystal from a safe distance, since now that its strength was back, its thunderbolts could reach farther. And explained that Raikou was likely trying to use the crystal to its advantage by sending off all of these lightning bolts in an attempt to hit Attila and Han. However, Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina reminded Usain that Raikou wasn't just hitting Attila and Han, even if that's what it intended to do, as it was forcing the three of them to have to dodge lightning strikes as well. Just then, Marina unfortunately gets hit by one of these lightning strikes, and it causes an explosion, sending her flying off of the cliff she was on, plummeting down. Fortunately, Jimmy sent out his Beedrill, and Beedrill was able to swoop in and rescue Marina before she fell to the ground. However, as Beedrill was flying back to the cliff with everyone else, Attila decided to send out his Skarmory to attack Beedrill with a Steel Wing, leading Jimmy to come up with a risky idea. He figured that Beedrill dropping Marina to the ground so that he or Vincent could catch her would be a better outcome than Skarmory landing the Steel Wing and forcefully sending Beedrill and Marina plummeting down. So Jimmy ordered Beedrill to drop Marina, and Beedrill obliged, as Marina fell down and Beedrill flew up right as the Skarmory was about to attack it, meaning that the Skarmory missed as a result. Although Marina was obviously still falling down, so Jimmy and Vincent run to catch her, but unfortunately Vincent tripped, landing face first. Jimmy tried to step in and catch her, but Vincent was the closest one, and actually Marina ended up landing on Vincent's body, which was able to leave her uninjured, as Vincent's body broke Marina's fall, but Vincent was very sore on his back now, so he couldn't even get up or speak to Marina to make sure she was okay, leading Jimmy to take over this job, as Jimmy ran over to Vincent's body as Marina got off of him, and Jimmy then untied her and asked if she was okay, with Marina confirming and thanking him for the rescue, totally forgetting about Vincent, as she didn't realize that she had fallen on him. Upon hearing Marina only thank Jimmy, Vincent gets jealous, giving him enough energy to get up, but he only gets more jealous as he sees that Jimmy and Marina were now looking lovingly into each other's eyes, indicating that Marina had really fallen for Jimmy since she thought that Jimmy was her sole rescuer. This led Vincent to bitterly yell, begging Marina not to forget him, clarifying that he was really the one who saved her since she fell on his back. Unfortunately for Vincent, he doesn't get any lovey-dovey eyes, and instead he just gets a thanks, but this was good enough for him. Just then, Han sent out her Steelix and commanded it to use Iron Tail on Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent. Vincent yells for someone to help them before Steelix murdered their asses, leading Usain to try and take action by sending out his Alakazam, but before he can do so, Raikou then shows up, and it's the one to save the day, as it attacks Steelix, tackling it into the cliff. Jimmy and Marina thank Raikou for the help, but warn it that it should leave, explaining that Jimmy and Marina likely wouldn't be able to protect the Raikou since they had failed the previous times. Raikou then revealed that the previous times clearly didn't matter now, as it had a new strategy this time. Raikou now knew that if it just attacked the crystal, then Hun or Attila would simply just activate the force field, which would knock Raikou down again. And he didn't want to have to rely on Jimmy and Marina having to save it, so its new strategy was to simply just go for Attila, who was in the mech controlling the crystal and monitoring it, planning to take out Hun and Attila and their mech so that they couldn't administer the field around the crystal anymore. So Raikou did just this, as it dodged the electric blasts that were being deflected from the crystal thanks to Hun and Attila, and eventually made it into their mech by jumping up and then smashing through the cockpit window where Attila was located. Attila escapes through the broken window, but Raikou didn't really care about this, as it was still able to use its claw to smash the controls that were linked to the crystal, meaning that Attila or Hun couldn't manage it anymore. Raikou then set its sights on the rest of the mech as it aimed to destroy the entire thing, but while it was doing this, since Attila had escaped, he was able to send out his Skarmory again and order it to go in for a sky attack on Raikou. However, as Skarmory swooped into the mech, Raikou jumped out right as it had finished its destruction of the mech by pulling out several wires with its teeth, which caused the mech to fully explode, with Skarmory being knocked out in the explosion. Everyone then realizes that, with the control panel having been destroyed in the mech, the crystal had stopped glowing purple and was seemingly now unable to do anything. The purple glow even disappeared from around it. As Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent celebrated, Jimmy finally realized why Raikou had continued to persist to come back when it could have just stayed away from the dangerous clouds, realizing that since Raikou was the guardian of electric Pokemon, it wanted to protect the electric Pokemon and stop the system, realizing also why Raikou kept attacking the crystal system as opposed to just Hun and Attila in the first place, since it viewed the system as the main danger, since the system was what was attacking the Pokemon. Yusin had already come to this conclusion, since, he knew that Raikou was the guardian of electric Pokemon, but he questioned why Raikou bothered to come and attack the crystal from up close when it was doing just fine, sending in lightning bolts from afar. Everyone else then questioned this as well, but Jimmy then realized that Raikou must not only protect electric Pokemon, but it also protects people that it viewed as its friends, and therefore realized that Raikou must trust Jimmy, Marina, Vincent, and Yusin now, and view them as its friends, and that's why it came in, to personally protect them, as simply just firing lightning bolts would only affect the crystal. It wouldn't be able to protect Jimmy or Marina or Vincent from its effects. With those questions sorted out, Vincent, Marina, and Jimmy continued to celebrate, but Yusin cut them off again, as he then had yet another inquiry. Why were Hun and Attila still there, and not retreated yet, due to losing the crystal, therefore ruining their plan? Raikou didn't see no reason to question this, as it realized that Hun and Attila were simply defenseless due to not having the crystal to redirect the electric attacks, so it simply took the opportunity to launch a Thunderbolt at Hun and Attila to send them blasting off, just as Jesse, James, and Meowth would be. However, as the Thunderbolt approaches Hun and Attila, they simply smile, indicating that they did have a plan after all. And sure enough, the Thunderbolt redirects onto the crystal, which deflects it back at Raikou, still, even though the crystal shouldn't have had any power left. Jimmy and the others questioned how the fuck this was possible, leading Attila and Hun to laugh, as they explained that the crystal wasn't deactivated simply because they had lost the controls in their mech. In fact, this had just made the crystal doubly powerful, as it now went into autopilot mode that the professor of Team Rocket had programmed into it. Jimmy and the others are absolutely terrified by this, as they fear what this autopilot mode that the professor of Team Rocket had implemented entailed. They soon realized, as the crystal utilized its autopilot mode, as Hun explained what was going on as it happened. Essentially, what was happening was the crystal turned black as it sucked in light, which made it attract electricity even more, just as the professor had designed it. Due to being even more attracted to electricity, it was able to suck in Raichu to it, sensing the pure electricity emanating from its body, and it proceeded to suck the electricity out of Raikou, even though Raikou didn't even administer an attack. Raikou was eventually sucked into the crystal to the point where it was touching it, causing it immense pain as it screamed out. Jimmy ordered Raikou to try and break free from the crystal and run away, but Hun taunted that it was impossible for Raikou to escape since it was now trapped by the crystal, since the crystal was so attracted to it. As the crystal continued to suck out Raikou's electricity, Hun taunted that thanks to the professor's science, her and Attila would be able to take all the credit for capturing Raikou, as they simply just wouldn't tell the rest of Team Rocket about the professor's involvement, and as a result, Hun and Attila would become legends in Team Rocket, taunting that they would become even bigger legends than Raikou. Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent were extremely pissed off by Team Rocket's taunts and the fact that they were draining Raikou of its electricity, which was essentially its goddamn life force. So they decided to take action and help out Raikou, as Jimmy sent out his Typhlosion, Marina her Mischievous, and Vincent his Meganium. Unfortunately, by this point, the crystal had gathered up more than enough electricity to bring the field around it yet again, hurting Raikou even more, and therefore stopping Typhlosion's flamethrower from making contact with the crystal. This leads Jimmy to remember what broke the field last time, being his, Marina's, and Vincent's attacks. So Jimmy orders Vincent and Marina to attack with him as they go in for a three-way attack, but they're stopped by Yusin, who warns them of the potential consequences of this, explaining that even though the combined force of the three attacks likely would be enough to destroy the field, since Raikou was trapped in the field, the attack would harm Raikou as well, and also cause the crystal to explode, which would therefore damage the Raikou and potentially even kill it. Hun and Attila then jump in and state that Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent shouldn't hesitate to kill the Raikou, since they didn't need it for their plans. All they needed was the electricity, which they were draining from it, so Raikou could be killed for all they care. Vincent, Marina, and Jimmy ignored Hun and Attilia as they questioned Yusin on what else they could do if they couldn't attack the field. Yusin clarified that he had an idea, but he was very reluctant to reveal it, indicating that it was extremely dangerous. Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina really wanted to save Raikou no matter what, so they pleaded with him to explain the idea, leading him to say that it was the all-or-nothing plan. Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina were intrigued by this, thinking that Yusin had a trick up his sleeve, but Yusin simply stated that they would have to break open the field and go in and get Raikou before the field exploded. Further warning that if the person who tried to save Raikou couldn't get out in time, then they would die as a result. Vincent, Marina, and Jimmy were surprised by Yusin's suggestion, as they had hoped that he had come up with a safer way, leading Yusin to state that it was a safer way, at least for Raikou, as now Raikou at least had a chance to escape the field if Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent were able to break in, instead of just attacking the field and letting Raikou die immediately in the explosion. Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina acknowledged this, and they did want to save Raikou, but they debated if sacrificing their own lives was really worth it, as they weighed the risks. For one, getting to the field would be dangerous enough, due to the electricity that could be emitted from it, as well as potentially Hun and Attila attacking, and even if they did get through the field, if they managed to destroy the field and get Raikou out, the field could obviously kill their asses when it exploded. As Vincent, Marina, and Jimmy continued to debate on if they should do this, they came up with the idea to have their Pokemon enter the field without them, and order them to attack the field from outside of it, essentially putting their Pokemon at risk. They obviously hesitated with this, as they didn't think it was right to order their Pokemon to go in for them, but they couldn't think of any other way. Yusin, desperate to save the Raikou, stated that their Pokemon would likely have to go in with them anyways to shield them from the electricity enough to even get in the crystal field, so they might as well just send their Pokemon in instead of putting themselves at risk as well. Jimmy was still hesitant, but then Typhlosion decided to make Jimmy's decision of sending him in for him, as he volunteered to send himself in, confident that he could withstand anything the field threw at him. To show its confidence and its strength, wanting to prove to everyone that it was strong enough to beat the field, it boosted its flame to a higher level than ever before, roared, and charged toward the field. Meganium and Mischievous were inspired by Typhlosion's courage, so they volunteered themselves as well, making the decision for their trainers as they followed Typhlosion to the field. Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent were shocked by their Pokemon's determination, as they just stood there in amazement, but then they realized that they probably just shouldn't sit there and should do something to help, so they got ready to command their Pokemon to do any dodges or moves, if necessary. And sure enough, they would have to do moves, as Hun and Attila weren't going to let the Pokemon reach the field, so they ordered their Steelix and Skarmory to attack, with Hun ordering Skarmory to use a Sky Attack. However, as Skarmory approached the Pokemon, Typhlosion caught it in midair, stopping the attack and allowing Meganium and Mischievous to run further to the field. Unfortunately, both Meganium and Mischievous are stopped in their tracks by Steelix, who uses Rock Throw, which prevents them from going any farther. However, Yusin then steps in and sends out his Alakazam to use Psybeam, which hits Steelix, and Alakazam continues to administer the Psybeam long enough for Steelix to remain distracted long enough so that Meganium and Mischievous could run past it, getting further to the field. Typhlosion was eventually able to fully deal with the Skarmory, knocking it out, and with the Alakazam still distracting Steelix, Typhlosion was able to run up to the field as well. So, with Typhlosion, Mischievous, and Meganium all up at the field, Jimmy orders Typhlosion to use a Flame Wheel, and Vincent orders Meganium to use a Light Screen, and both attacks hit the field. Fearing for the field's safety, Attilia sends out his second Pokemon, which was revealed to be a Muck, so that he can have his Muck stop Meganium and Typhlosion in their tracks before they can further damage the field. And he has his Muck specifically target Meganium with its poisonous Sludge Bomb, since Grass types were weak against poison attacks. Mischievous tries to protect Meganium by using Psybeam on Muck, but Skarmory stops Mischievous with a Sky Attack, as Skarmory had come back due to Typhlosion no longer keeping it busy. In order to protect Mischievous, Alakazam then arrives to serve as a distraction yet again, as it tries to use Psybeam on Skarmory. Unfortunately, Skarmory manages to dodge the Psybeam, but it does so by flying up, and Alakazam continues to fire more Psybeams, so all of this serves as a distraction for Skarmory, allowing Meganium and Typhlosion to focus on attacking the field, as Mischievous kept Muck busy. Meganium and Typhlosion hope to use their attacks to damage or overload the Crystal Force Field, not worried about their lives at all if the field were to explode, because Raikou had managed to wake up after it had passed out due to the excruciating pain. So this meant that if the force field went down, then Raikou could escape on its own, allowing Meganium and Typhlosion to simply focus on saving themselves. Yusin also noticed that Raikou had woken up, and he alerted Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent of this, as the four of them then encouraged the Raikou to hang in there for just a little bit longer, and explained that they were trying to get rid of the field so that Raikou could escape. Just then, Meganium and Typhlosion's attacks had done enough damage to begin weakening the field, leading Yusin to cheer. However, Hun then got an idea on how to stop Meganium and Typhlosion's attacks, as she ordered Steelix to use Crunch, but not on the Pokemon, on Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent. Steelix used Crunch, however, it managed to miss Vincent, Jimmy, and Marina, but Hun didn't care, as Killing Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent was only their secondary goal. Their primary goal was to stop Typhlosion and Meganium from attacking the field, and Hun thought that they could do this if they warned the Pokemon that if they didn't stop attacking the field, then they would have Steelix continue to attack their trainers. But if Typhlosion and Meganium agreed to stop attacking the field, then they would have Steelix let off of the trainers. Essentially, Hun was making Meganium and Typhlosion choose between destroying the field and saving Raikou, or saving their trainers from Steelix's crunch. Typhlosion and Meganium debate on what to do, but much like the Pokemon had made the decision for their trainers to go after the field, Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent make the decision for their Pokemon, telling them to not worry about them, assuring them that they would be alright, and instructing them to keep focusing on taking out the field and saving Raikou, with Jimmy declaring that if their Pokemon were willing to put their lives at risk, then they were as well. With that, Meganium and Typhlosion continue to attack the field, as Hun instructs their Steelix to attack the trainers, just as they said they would. So, Steelix goes in for an Iron Tail on the trainers, but then Alakazam comes in and uses Psybeam on Steelix to confuse it to stop the Iron Tail. Attilia decides that him and Hun should divide and conquer, so while Hun and her Steelix continue to try and attack the trainers, Attila orders his Muck and Skarmory to attack Meganium and Typhlosion, as they oblige, with Muck attacking Meganium with Sludge Bomb, and Skarmory attacking Typhlosion with Fury Attack. As for Steelix, it swiftly dealt with Alakazam, sending it flying with an Iron Tail, and also dealt with Mischievous with the same attack. And then, it focused its attention on the trainers once again, specifically Jimmy, as it chased him to the edge of a cliff above a river. Steelix then went to use Crunch, leaving Vincent and Marina to suggest that Jimmy make a run for it, but Jimmy instead provoked Steelix by saying that it couldn't crunch a potato chip, so it obviously couldn't crunch him. Obviously, Steelix gets pissed off at this. So, instead of crunching Jimmy, he gets so angry that he flails around, swinging his tail in the process to try and hit Jimmy with an Iron Tail. However, this was just as Jimmy had wanted, as since Steelix was so heavy, its tail took longer to come down than if Steelix was simply to bite him. So, this allowed Jimmy to call over his Beedrill, and his Beedrill saved him, flying him off the cliff, right as Steelix's tail came down. And to make things worse for Steelix, when its hard tail came down, it managed to break the section of the cliff that the tail hit, which in turn sent Steelix plummeting down into the river below. However, Meganium and Typhlosion were still being attacked by Muck and Skarmory, and they were only about to get attacked harder, as Hun and Attila were now angered by Steelix's defeat, so they ordered Muck and Skarmory to attack as hard as they could. Just then, though, Alakazam and Mischievous show up and use Psybeam on Muck and Skarmory, preventing them from attacking Meganium and Typhlosion any farther. Because of this, Meganium and Typhlosion are able to continue putting all their efforts into taking out the field, and it looks as though the field was finally about to be destroyed, when suddenly, Steelix returns, emerging from the river, and goes to use Crunch on Meganium and Typhlosion. Jimmy sees this and questions how this was possible, leading Hun to laugh, as they state that Steelix must have managed to escape the river by digging underneath the waterbed and then launching up when it went around the other side of the cliff. Regardless of this, Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina knew that they had to do something to protect Typhlosion and Meganium, since they were putting their lives at risk for them, so they stood in the way of the Steelix, willing to take the Crunch attack if it meant protecting their Pokemon. Eugene warns them to get out of the way, as the Crunch was about to hit, although upon seeing this, Raikou respected Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent even more, and was determined to protect them, so it used up all of the power it had left to somehow absorb the electricity from the force field, essentially taking its electricity back due to the force field being damaged, and it then unleashes this electricity at Steelix. Since this electric blast was one of the most powerful ones recorded in the history of the Pokemon world, it was able to have enough power to even break through the force field as well when it hit Steelix, obviously knocking Steelix out. Not only was the field destroyed, but the crystal itself had begun to crack, which immensely shocked Hun and Attila, since the scientist, or professor rather, had claimed that it was indestructible and that it was the top technology that was ever designed by Team Rocket. They were then even more shocked as they saw the Raikou emerge from the now gone force field with electricity surrounding it. This leads Hun and Attila to remark how one of the best advancements in technology in the entire world must have been able to be destroyed only by one of the best Pokemon in the entire world in terms of skill, admitting that Raikou was extremely strong, but realizing that with the crystal now cracked and unable to unveil another force field, they couldn't win. So, Hun and Attila ran away in their helicopter, leaving the now useless crystal behind, as they declare that they would return one day and find some other way to become legends, not just within Team Rocket, but in the entire world. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see you guys again, totally. You guys totally weren't just one-off antagonists for this special. Anyways, as Jimmy, Marina, Vincent, and Eugene celebrate their victory against Team Rocket, Raikou then uses Thunderbolt to destroy the now completely useless crystal, shattering it into pieces. Because of this, all of the dark clouds then begin to disappear, and Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent then thank Raikou for saving them, as Raikou looks at them, acknowledging that it now respected them, and leaps off into the wilderness by going to a mountain in the distance. As Jimmy and the others watched Raikou leave, Jimmy called out to it, stating his desire to meet it again, though he agreed with Vincent, Marina, and Eugene that even if he did never see it again, none of them would ever forget Raikou. Jimmy, Marina, Vincent, Eugene, Typhlosion, Meganium, Mischievous, Alakazam, and Beedrill then all cheer, happy that the Raikou was finally safe as they wave goodbye to it. Later, Jimmy, Marina, Vincent, and Yassine had all returned to the Pokemon Center to inform Nurse Joy, Officer Jenny, and Kudo what had happened. Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina then decide to continue on a journey together for a little bit as they say goodbye to Jenny, Joy, Yassine, and Kudo. But before they go, Kudo tells them all, especially Jimmy, not to try something like what they had with Raikou, again, reminding them of the dangers, stating that even they wouldn't be able to handle another risky adventure like that. Jimmy doesn't promise anything though, stating, who knows what could happen. This leads Kudo to admit that maybe Jimmy was right. Sometimes you couldn't avoid trouble, and simply told him to try not to get into trouble too often. After Jimmy, Vincent, and Marina set off, shortly after, they approach a crossroads that leads to multiple different areas, and they all wanted to go in different directions, so they decided to split off. But not before they reminisce on when the three of them first met each other, when they all got their starter Pokemon from Professor Elm, at the same time, as Vincent had gotten his Meganium as a Chikorita from Professor Elm, just as Jimmy got his Cyndaquil and Marina got her Totodile. Jimmy, Marina, and Vincent then remark how this parting at the crossroads was very similar to their initial parting after they left Newbark Town. And then Jimmy is the first one to split off as he goes down the straight path. Once Jimmy's gone, Vincent asks Maria to call him later, obviously wanting another chance to flirt with her because he still had a massive crush on her, and much to Vincent's delight, Marina agrees. Vincent then departs from Marina happily, thinking that he was about to get himself a girlfriend. However, unfortunately for Vincent, as we knew, Marina was way more interested in Jimmy, as she only looked at Vincent for 1 second after he walked off, and immediately turned her attention to Jimmy, who was still walking down the straight path, and looked at him for a long time before she finally went down the other path with her mistress following her. The special then ends with one more scene a little while later as Jimmy is walking alone through the woods when his Pokegear rings, and it's revealed that the caller was Marina, and she then explains that before leaving the Pokemon Center, she had bought a new Pokegear from the shop there to replace the one that Attila had destroyed. Jimmy questions how Marina got his number, leading Marina to reveal that she got his number from Vincent. Man, poor Vincent. He just got cucked, didn't he? He probably didn't even expect that Marina liked Jimmy this much, and just gave it to her to be respectful to her. Poor Vincent, man. Anyways, Marina then offers to give Jimmy her number so that they could contact each other whenever. And this time, instead of ignoring her request, he accepts it, getting Marina's number. He simply just calmly thanked her for giving him his number when he talked to her, but in his mind, he was fucking absolutely overjoyed at the fact that he had his crush's number. Although, he still wasn't going to admit that he actually had a crush on her in person, no. He was too much of a pussy for that. But to be fair, Vincent was a pussy as well, so Marina couldn't really win, so she may as well go with who she wants. And she wanted Jimmy, so hopefully they end up together, but we'll probably never know, as this is the last episode that focuses on them. Overall, I'd say that these three specials here were definitely a nice change of pace for me, because I've been recording so much of just fucking Ash and the gang. And yeah, it was nice to have some different protagonists for once. But the next episode chronologically is back with Ash and the gang, of course, so see you then.